you do, I mean, do you do, actually, let's start off with you describing what recruiting is like for you at Essex, both graduate and undergraduate.
So are we talking normal times or COVID
Yeah,
times?
yeah, normal times.
Normal times. Well, so it generally will be a slightly different process. So our postgrads are typically international students, and by that I mean non-EU. So there'll be Canadian, American, Brazilian. So obviously we're not going to fly them in to train the squad, which obviously then presents a different type of recruitment process. So what I've learned through over the years is that with the postgrads is that they need to play a different role within the squad. It's not just about trying to recruit the best 6 postgrads. Actually, I now go down the route of actually who are the people that are the best people, that have the personalities, that are happy and prepared and want to give back to their sport and the student athletes in the years below them, but also maybe students that didn't have the experience they wanted when they were at their whilst they were studying their undergrad. And by that I mean, for example, they weren't allowed to travel. Maybe they were training 20 hours a week and actually they want a little bit less than that. They want to, experience what a normal student would, whilst also being part of a volleyball team. So for the postgrads, yeah, very much about the personality, because 9 out of 10 of the ones that I speak to are actually of a good enough standard volleyball-wise. So that's the route for them. And that has to all be done on Zoom, Skype, WhatsApp, whatever it is. And I normally speak to them and tell them all about the university, the volleyball and the experience. They're the 3 pillars that we work off of. And tell them about it. And I'm upfront about it and say, look, guys, this first phone call, I'm going to be doing all the talking. Feel free to ask questions, but it's all me giving you information, because you can't research it. You can't find this out on the internet. So we do that. And then there's a follow-up call, which is where they do all the talking. And I've got whatever it is, 31 questions that I ask them. So they spend an hour and 20 minutes telling me about themselves, and these questions are there to try and thought provoke and for a way for me to try and figure out what kind of person are they. Are they the type of people that just get on with tasks, or are they going to stand up and actually say, well, how about we do it a different way? And is it all about me, or is it about the team? And so I try to push a couple of little buttons with those questions to see what kind of person they are. And it's definitely not a science. It's very much an art. And after that, then I'll kind of start to make a decision whether I want to continue with pursuing them. And then we'll have, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, depending on the person, more Zoom calls. I'll obviously collect their references and contact them, medical forms as well. And yeah, we'll get to a point where actually it's like, I do want this person, and we'll make an offer, like financial offer, and yeah, then that's negotiated. Although actually there's no real negotiating. That's all I can offer. I will always offer the maximum, and I tell them that this is the limit. I can't give you any more than that. Yeah, and that process can start, anywhere between. I think the earliest I've ever recruited anyone is maybe about 18 months out, and the shortest, July, for them to arrive in September. And you can't do any shorter than that because of visas,
right?
And get them on the course. So that's the postgrad. Undergrad is very different. The scholarship offer is very different, well, specifically the financial component. And for them, I'm more looking at not where they are. I'm looking at where they want to be and whether they have the mindset to be able to achieve that. And some of them can be can you phrase it? Not in la la land, but just not aware of who they are, where they are. Yeah, and they think that they're going to go on to play in the Olympics, and it's like, you do realise Great Britain doesn't have an Olympic team, and they're like, no.
Well,
so,
they might have again someday. Had one for 2012.
Exactly. We just need to host the Olympics again. It'll all be fine. So yeah, they're not necessarily aware of their situation. So, but again, it's more about where they want to go. And again, the reality is, from my perspective, is if they're that good, they shouldn't be coming to us. They should be going off to the States, because they will get a better financial scholarship, and they get a 4-year program, whereas with us it's generally only 3 years. Obviously, the physical aspect of it does come into it, but it's far from a deciding factor, far from, because we talk a lot about wanting to help develop our athletes as a volleyball player, as an athlete, as a person. And so we can teach them to jump high. We can teach them to move quicker. We can teach them to hit a ball harder. Working with their mindset, you can teach that, but it's a very hard slog. And yeah, it's normally when they get to the final year that you realise that actually they have become an adult, and that they are, then that's when we try to recruit our final year undergrads to stay for a 4th year with us to do a master's. But with the undergrads, we do get them, if we can, to come and visit. So even if they're from the EU, we'll offer them to come over and to train for a couple of days with the squad. The British undergrads, again, we'll ask them to come down, and depending on how, what the time of the year it is, actually, we can get their travel paid for. If they're coming down for an open day, the university pays for their travel. So that makes it a little bit easier for them to fly from Scotland, for example, and then stay for a week and fly back. Right. And they get to meet their lecturers and maybe go to a few classes as well, and meet the staff and hang out with the guys and see what life at Essex is like. Mm-hmm. And timescales for undergrad. So we have a recruitment process for university that's the same for every university in the UK. So it uses a system called UCAS. So for 17-year-olds, they will submit their applications. They can have up to 5 applications via the UCAS system, somewhere between September and January the 15th, the year before they go to university. And then the university replies and gives them an offer or not. And then they have to pick their top 2. And if they get the grades, then they get in. And they don't get their grades until the first, I think it's the first, or it's the second Thursday in August. Doesn't leave a lot of time. So we try to recruit them before that UCAS application system happens. But the reality is that trying to convince a 16-year-old to do anything is hard enough. So we'll go speak to them via the England Junior and England Cadet camps, or we do an online seminar at the moment with the juniors back in December.
So, okay. So basically, there's going to be 2 questions of this, but the first part is, so basically your first stage of recruitment is just trying to get them to put you at the top of the priority list in UCAS.
So the undergrads, they can put 5 down. They don't necessarily have to put 1 to 5. It can be any order, because the universities then reply and say, yes, we will make you a conditional offer based on your predicted grades. Mm-hmm. And then after that, then they have to put down their top 2, and we have to try and get them to put us as their number 1. Because the reality is the system, in my opinion, the UCAS system, it's not broken. It just needs modification for the current era. Because now universities will be cheeky, and this isn't related to sport at all, but universities will offer an unconditional offer if you put them as their first choice, which then makes it like, well, yeah, which, if you've got a university that's really highly ranked and they make you an offer with that, you're like, hold on a second, I'm probably not going to get the grades to go there, or I'm like borderline. So you would probably opt for that. Obviously with sport, it's slightly different because you would probably choose to go to an institution because of the sport. That would be a major deciding factor.
Is there any influence on this from the university side of things on making an offers where it comes to sport? Or is it strictly an admissions thing, irrelevant, sport is irrelevant?
Yeah, so every university will be slightly different on how they do it. I can tell you with ours. So they will get flagged as a sports scholar. And so their application will just get looked at in a little bit more depth. So you have to remember that, universities, we receive something like 30,000 applications a year. And we only take whatever it is, 5,000, 6,000. There's a lot of application forms there, and they have to read through every single personal statement, every single reference. So when I know that someone's applying, I will keep an eye out for application on the system and then get it flagged as soon as they apply. It doesn't bend the rules per se, it just makes the process a lot easier. And if we can get them to visit, that does make it easier, because suddenly, and this is just my opinion, but you become a person and not just a UCAS number.
Mm-hmm.
So when, like, if you're borderline, for example, and it goes to the course selector, Professor Pete reads it and goes, oh, that's that kid I met back in January. He was really a nice kid, seemed very enthusiastic and switched on and asked clever questions, and you're a person. So I think it makes it easier for them to say yes. I don't have any proof of that apart from we've never had anyone not get in that we didn't want to get in. So whether that works or not is...
So it's not that there's a direct, what we would in the States call admissions consideration, where if you're on the list, like when I coached in the Ivy League, if we put somebody on the list, assuming of course that they met some minimum standards, they would almost definitely get accepted.
So for us, yes, again, yes and no. So if you, like at Essex, we have, I don't know what it is, 5 or 6 courses that have course limits. So for example, sports therapy as an undergrad has a limited number of places. I think they can take, I think it's 60 per year group. So if you're applying and you are borderline and there's other people that are straight A's, we're going to struggle a little bit. But if you're doing sports science, which doesn't have a limit, they're probably going to take you.
Mm-hmm.
So, because they'll make you an offer, but you have to still get the grades. You can't just, hey, I've got a conditional offer, they'll let me in anyway because of volleyball. No, you still have to get the A-level grades,
right,
to be able to get in. So it is, but it isn't that kind of structure like you have in the US. But I do know at other universities in the UK, they'll have a list beforehand and they know, again, there or thereabouts, they'll be given an offer and they'll get in.
Yeah.
To do
well, it's, in some places in the US, there's no consideration. Some, especially, I know some of the Division III, more academic schools, it's like, no, they either get in on their own merits or they don't get in at all. Athletics doesn't really come into it. So you've got all different types. On the identification part, you mentioned connecting with the England junior squads and presumably Scotland. No, I mean, I don't know if Northern Ireland really does. Are they doing junior squads?
Well, I've got 2 students from Northern Ireland that are applying for September.
Okay.
My first one's from Northern Ireland. I don't know if they're going to get in. I don't know if I'm going to make them an offer yet, but we've had that initial phone call.
So the question I have is, do you actually go out and watch these kids play?
So they have to fill in a questionnaire, and part of that they have to submit video links, which normally isn't a problem. Because even if they don't have any video, they go, oh, I'll go
You
make
can go
some.
get it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's proven a little bit of a problem at the moment. And I still quite haven't figured out a way around it of how we're going to make scholarship offers when I can't see the videos. So, because even if you ask the coach for a reference, it's based in their environment as opposed to like being able to compare it to other players that might be coming in. Like, you know, the best player from Northern Ireland, for example, is not going to be the best player when they're coming from Italy, probably. Right. So I'm still thinking
almost
about,
definitely.
I'm still thinking on how to work that one out. There will be a solution.
I recently went through that issue. A high school kid here in New York. I was talking with her club coach, or at least somebody in her club that is involved with, that she's involved with, who said, hey, you know, this could be interesting for you. She doesn't have any video in her profile. She's one of those kids that just got caught. Like they didn't record any video in her last high school seasons. Things got shut down before they got any video recorded during club season. And she hasn't really had an opportunity to do anything in the interim. So my solution to that, now, I don't know this coach. The only thing I know is that they were the first person to ever coach here. They were the first women's volleyball coach at Madai. That was 20 something years ago. They're obviously still coaching at this point. So I don't know their point of reference for what a good player looks like in the modern era, especially in terms of what I'm trying to recruit versus what they would have looked like for them at that point, or whatever impressions, as you were kind of saying. So I actually had them take a look at video of a kid who got committed in the same position. All right, how does she stack up against this kid? Well, she's better at this. She's not as good at this. And, you know, so at least I can kind of, okay, get a sort of, now there's still a lot of fuzziness in that because there's no objective measures being involved here aside from height.
Yeah.
You know, so, you know, okay, that kid's bigger or that kid's bigger. Okay, that's a starting point, but does this kid jump 3 inches higher? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, how much faster is this kid moving from one pin to the other as a middle blocker? I don't know. How fast are their arms? I don't know.
The one thing I did think about, which is very different for us this side of the pond compared to you, is that actually, like, we give our undergraduate scholarships. It's a cash payment 3 times a year. So one option actually is that, you know what, no one gets anything. And we reassess the squad in the fall semester, and then we award it at Christmas. And then they can either have 2 payments, you know, January and May, or we go, which is something that I've been pushing for a long time, January, May, September. And then that way, that's for the new undergrads.
Right.
I like that delayed payment, because in what industry in the world do you get payment before you've done anything? Like you and I both, we get paid at the end of the month after we've worked. And actually, if they got paid in December, you've got to meet these criteria to get paid. And I had a long discussion a couple of years ago about if we'd done it like that, you could almost categorize a number of things and go, if you, for example, lift weights X amount of times, which is decided in conjunction with the S&C coach, say 30 times, so that's 3 times a week, then you'll get 100% of your payment. And then it tapers down to a certain point where you get nothing. And then actually their lifting is partly related to their scholarship amount. Likewise, you know, where's the team in the league? You can quantify that very easily. How many sessions did you miss? Well, actually, I don't have an issue with that. It's very rare that I have players missing sessions, and it's normally known way in advance anyway. So, but there's certain things you can quantify.
Yep.
And that was one of the conversations we had about that. But again, I think hopefully this is just going to be a 1-year situation where we don't have it and we don't have to rely on tweaking things constantly.
Yeah. So back to you had a question. All right, obviously you're trying to look at kids on video to the extent that you can, but do you actually go out and scout them in
No,
person?
I no longer have a budget to go out. In the early days, we did have a budget to go around to the junior academies that are located around England. So we did that, went down a little roadshow and presented our program to the players. But what we have done in the last 3 years, we've gone to the national centre and played a friendly against the England juniors or England cadets, and then had a chance to speak to them. Plus we have I can't think what it's called. What's it called? Basically, it's an open day where we'd go again to the national centre, and all the England juniors and cadets would be there, and they'd have a chance to come and talk to us. We'll take prospectuses and flyers and whatever paraphernalia we've got, and give that out to them. But again, last eights would normally be a time for me to go to them and watch them playing with their club or their schools. Inter-regionals, that's a slightly lower standard. They don't always have
some of those matches that I've seen in the past were dire.
Yeah, it's just like, what's the reward on going? Part of that is actually showing face. I do think that is worth it, because it's not just about recruiting the players as well. Like, I've got one kid on our program this year that he knows he's never going to go on to play pro, but actually he's going to do some really good stuff with us, like cameraman work and video editing work, and so when he graduates, he will have a portfolio of work that will make him stand out from the crowd. So it's also about recruiting those other people. And can we recruit for the second team, who will then help the first team?
Right. And I think the marketing angle is something people don't give enough thought to. You're not always going out to actually recruit specific kids. Sometimes you're just going out to make sure that you're being seen and people are talking about you and recognizing that you're engaged, and not just sitting in your gym in Essex, not talking to people and just hoping they all come to you.
Yeah,
there are some coaches that do that.
I 100% agree. And that's one of the reasons why my first phone call with people is about me telling them about the program. Because some of them are like, this isn't for me. I'm like, that's fine. Like, I've not wasted my time. I've not wasted your time by, having 3 or 4 phone calls and then finding out. Like, everything on day one. But I do know that that person will then speak to their friends and go, I spoke to this coach about the program, sounds really good, but just not for me. And we've had it that their friends have then got in touch with me and gone, you spoke to Bobby. Like, what's this all about? Can you tell me about it? And so that word of mouth does get out there. So I don't ever view those initial phone calls ever as a waste.
And you never know when there's a younger sibling. That in a couple of years' time, you had a good engagement with the older sibling. Maybe they didn't come, but you treated them well, were professional, whatever. But then the second kid is just interested in different things. So Essex is more appealing.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about just recording a video for that presentation?
Yes, many a time. And then I go and say no, because actually then you lose the personal touch. And I think that personal touch is really important. And sometimes the parents are in the background and you can hear them. Ask about the accommodation. And you're like, just tell your parents to jump in on the call. It's great. I don't mind. And that happens, 4 or 5 times a year. A parent will be like, okay. And then they sit next to them and ask questions. But if it's just a video, you won't get that. But we will at some point make a video, which, be like a 10-minute video, which will just cover the highlights of everything.
This is Essex volleyball, something like that.
Yeah. But I think, volleyball education experience, the the volleyball will continue to evolve every single year. We learn something every single year, so we need to pass that on to people. Likewise, you know, facilities like that changes. Since I've been there, we've gone from a Taraflex floor in the old hall to a sprung wooden floor in the old hall to a new 3-court arena with the 4K cameras. Then we got the 7-meter TV screen, like the 21-foot TV screen. Then the sports therapy clinic come online, and then this year we got a new weights room for the performance squads, which we haven't been able to use yet. So like, again, every year there's something that's added. And then the experience, that doesn't really change that much in my opinion, because we're 45 minutes away from Stansted, and return flights to Rome is dead cheap.
Question on your process, because you mentioned there's like a 5-step process, especially for the postgrads. Do you actually communicate that to them in the beginning? Like, hey, okay, this is how it works. We'll have this conversation, then we'll have this conversation, and blah blah blah. Or is it you just go through the process as it progresses?
Yeah, no, I do say to them that, you know, like currently I'm running weekly recruitment calls on a Wednesday because I've been furloughed 4 out of 5 days. I've got to be real strict with the time that I have. So at the moment, every Wednesday night I have an hour recruitment call where I tell them about it, and in that way actually I can have a conversation with 5, 10, 15 people at the same time, and they can ask questions as we go along. And so I say to them that, you know, each year I have about 100 people apply for a scholarship, and so I need to have a little bit of time to go through all of their videos normally, and obviously contact their references and get their medical forms. So what I will do is that, and again, I always say to them that I'll be open and honest with you as possible. Out of this 100, there's probably going to be a third which are a definite no. There's a red flag somewhere, whether that's or whatever, like somewhere, so they can get rid of them. Then there'll be a certain group where actually they turn around and say, I'm not interested. And so you'll get down to 40 maybe pretty quickly. And so we'll arrange those follow-up phone calls, and all that will happen before Easter. And I'll tell you, you're in the top 20, and then, or not. And then I'll say, you're in the top 10 and I'll make you an offer. But the ones who don't quite make it, I say to them, look, you know, it's not unheard of that people drop out, or actually I've got a better offer somewhere else, because they're not just talking to me. Right. They're going to be talking to other places as well, and I'm very aware of that. And some years other universities get like a huge budget, and the next year they get nothing. So basically I say, look, keep involved in the process. It doesn't cost anything to apply. April, I'll make you the offer, accept it within, 3 weeks. And then we continue to have these other phone calls and then team Zoom calls that start at the end of June. So they're aware of the process. Obviously, they don't know all the nitty-gritty details that happen in the background because they see it from quite a blinkered view, and that's their own journey. But the other thing that I like is that we're now at a stage where actually we get quite a few recommendations. It's like, as you said before, oh, my older brother came, or a former teammate of mine came. Like I got an email this week from a former teammate of one of my former players, and who recommended us. And his old club coach is another former player of ours. And all these are in the States, not over here.
Right.
And he's like, I'm really interested in coming. Can we set the call up like straight away and get the ball rolling? And that's great. And I can go to those two people that have been through the program, know exactly what I'm about, know exactly what our structure is and our ethos is, and go, is he the right type of player for us? Yeah. And if they say yes, that lowers my barriers straight away, and we'll push him up a little bit higher, and then I can ask them like, who's he comparable to?
Right.
And again, that makes life so much easier. And for the last couple of years, we've had a couple of people like that, and that's comforting.
It's great. One of the great things about the volleyball world is how small it really is. and that you probably know somebody who knows somebody.
Yeah.
And it just, a random example of this is somebody tried to connect with me last week or the week before on LinkedIn, and I mentioned this to you, but I'll mention it to the audience at this point. They're a former Madai player on the women's team from, I think she graduated in 2012. Yeah, I believe that. Or 2012 was her last season year. So maybe she graduated in 13. She ended up going on, I think, 2 years later to play at Bournemouth, which is another English school. Big rival for yours now in the Premier Leagues. Big rival for me when I was coaching at Exeter, because they were in the same league as we were in those days when Division One was still the top division. I had no reason to expect that somebody from Division Three Madai would end up going and playing postgrad in England somewhere, but she did. Maybe one time I'll actually reach out and ask her about her experiences and see what that was like. So you never know where those connections and contacts might be somewhere in your network. It's an interesting thing. I want to went back to what you talked about at the beginning in terms of judging character, because one of the issues that a lot of coaches bring up in this environment of not being able to go watch the kids in person is they feel like they miss out on a bit of that element of how do they interact with their teammates, what's their energy and their attitude on the court. And you can get a little bit of that on video, especially if you can get some unedited video that's not strictly just highlights. But if you're not in the gym, then you got to do it this way. You got to do it over Zoom, got to do it over the phone. So I don't want you to list out all 31 of your questions because that's probably going to take way too long. But if you want to pick out a few of them that kind of speak toward what you're trying to get.
So I'll ask them, for example, what's their most difficult time, and leave it at that. Sometimes like, what, in volleyball, in life? And I'm like, either or. Just tell me something that's been really difficult for you and how you overcome it. And then later on, I'll ask them specifically, what's your most difficult time in volleyball? And these questions will also be asked. So some of the questions will be asked them again later on in follow-up phone calls, just to see if they're BSing me or not. Because everyone knows. Some of them will just tell you what they think you want to hear. And so you'll catch a few of them out like that. And then I will ask them about whether they've ever been the strongest in a group, and how did they behave, and the flip of that, the weakest in the group, and how did they behave as well. I ask them about whether they're the type of person that just gets on with a task regardless of the difficulty or reason. And some of them are like, yes. And I'm like, what if I tell you to run up 15 flights of stairs, would you do it? And they're like, yeah, your coach, you know best. I'm like, well, I don't know best. Like, I have an informed decision, and plus I'm not going to make you run up 15 flights of steps. That's just like a complete waste of time. How does that help you with volleyball? It doesn't. And then you can see them think about it. Oh yeah, actually. And then
you're horrifying some coaches right now, I can tell you.
Yeah.
What? You're encouraging the kids not to listen to their coach?
I encourage them to have an opinion, because they need to have an opinion. And you know what? You and I, we don't know everything. And I will learn something from every single kid as they will learn something from me. And I've had it before where a drill's not been working, and I'm like, one of the players stopped sorry, it wasn't working. I called like a water break, and one of the students who was a postgrad said, hey, can we tweak this a little bit, because it's not going the way that you want it to. Like, happy to, because you're right. I'm not. We're not getting out of it what we should be. And this person went, right, we're doing the same as what Porter said, but we're just going to do this, and it was amazing. And I'm like, genius. Write that down in my book. And I've used that numerous times ever since. So I will continue to learn. And then what other questions do I ask them about? I asked them what advice would they give to their 18-year-old self. This is for postgrads. It's a different question for the undergrads. Mm-hmm. Because they're going to be working with 18-year-old kids that are, first year university, first year lights.
Yeah.
And will need some guidance. and get them to think about that. I mean, as I said before, it's definitely an art. It's not a science. And there's always going to be one or two that fall through the cracks or that do manage to pull the wool over your eyes. But on the whole, I mean, and these questions change or modify slightly every year. I'll take a couple out that I don't think are worthwhile and add some more in. And I do throw a few left field ones in there, which, for example, one of them I ask them, and there's a specific reason why I ask them this. It's going to be typical now. All of them are going to come up with great answers because they've listened to this. One of them is like, you've just woken up on a foreign planet. Of course, it's a foreign planet. Anyway, another planet, and everyone speaks your language. It looks exactly like Earth, but you don't know anyone. You can't call home. Your hotel is paid for a week, and your food's paid for a week, and you've got $500. What do you do next? Can't go home. What do you do? And some of them are like, well, I'm just going to go and buy loads of pizza. I'm like, your food's taken care of. So first of all, you've shown me you're not listening. And another one's like, well, I'm going to go get a job. Okay, good. Anything else? And they're like, well, I'll just figure it out. And I'm like, because I've asked it millions of times, I mean, my answer, only one person has ever answered it the way I would. First thing I would do is go find a volleyball club, because you have an instant social network. Instantly you can find a job because someone at that volleyball club will have an opening. Anyone got a spare room that I can crash at? Like, as you said, the volleyball world is so small that everyone genuinely looks after each other. So, and I asked that question because they're flying to a different country where they don't know anyone, and they will have some money with them, but their accommodation is already paid for the first semester. But it will be probably 3 weeks until they get their federal loan come through.
Sure.
So they need to learn to survive. So it's interesting to see how they answer that question. There's a few other left field ones like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting that you bring up the club, and because that's exactly what I did when I went to Exeter, even before I got to Exeter, when I did my visit, and you know, I parallel to doing my conversations on the academic side of things, I went and hung out at a club, just to, hey, I want to have a social aspect of this outside of the academics, and that ended up turning into me coaching the university teams. Never planned on it, but it just, you know, that's just how it went.
It's an instant social network.
Yep.
And, you know, obviously your degree is worth a lot, but also who you know is worth a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you can tap into that network straight away, I think that's a really positive thing.
Right.
So, yeah, I asked that because I want to know, can they stand on their own 2 feet? What they're going to do when they first arrive? Are they going to go and blow their $500 on booze and pizza? Or a few of them are like, I'm going to invest it. I'm like, what are you going to get in 1 week's worth of investing? Like, if you invest in Bitcoin at the moment, you're going to lose a third of it straight away.
Yeah. Going back a bit to the identification, just to clarify for people real quick, obviously trying to recruit the England juniors and youth national team kids is fairly easy because they're all in one place. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, they train about 1 weekend a month, give or take, depending on the time of year, and in one location pretty much. So it's not that hard to go and just watch them and maybe even talk to them in between sessions and stuff. There aren't the restrictions that we have in the States with club tournaments and whatnot. And of course, there aren't that many to deal with anyway. In terms of the postgrads, I know you work with some services, or at least one, right? So what proportion of those candidates are you getting off of services, recruiting type services, versus cold emails to you, versus referrals that you're trying to chase down?
So what, I've never worked out the stats for that. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, technically 5 agents that we use for recruitment, but the reality is most of them come through 4 of them. They all work in a very different way. And the relationship I have with them is very different. So some of them will give me a call and go, hey, I've got this kid. Do you want to have a look at him? Other ones are like, what do you need? And I'll go find someone. Other ones is more of a portal, and I can go on and have a look for certain positions on certain years. But they also actually do send me a message every now and again and go, I've got this kid, definitely worth a look. And the ones I found the most successful are the ones with the personal touch, if I'm honest. You know, you can't beat someone picking up the phone and saying, I've got this middle player, he's 6'10" and jumps through the roof and he's blah, 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 blah. And okay, all sounds great. And then you go, he hasn't played for 10 years. Well, they don't always list that on the email or so, but actually, you know, we've had someone before that hadn't played for 5 years, I think it was. But he'd been coaching and doing other stuff since then. And so he was like, there was 2 of them that year that were like the elder statesmen, and they loved it, absolutely loved it, because the pressure wasn't on them to like necessarily develop and get better for them. They're like, I want to be involved. I want to be part of a team again. And so they played a very, very different role within the squad. And they've both recommended, in fact, both those 2 people have recommended people to come to Essex. But to answer your question about how many come through cold calling via an agency, I'd say not that many are cold calls or cold emails. And even the ones that do come through that are randomly out of the blue, later on down the line, we'll probably find one of the agencies, just because those agencies know all about the visas and the university application process. I mean, the application process is a doddle. It's not difficult. It really isn't rocket science. You fill it on the website. It's free. You've got to submit your transcripts and certificates. You know, it's quite straightforward, if I'm honest. But when you get to the visa part, that's not straightforward, and the law changes all the blooming time. So much so that I don't give any visa advice. I'm not allowed to give visa advice. There's one department in the university that is allowed, but the agents are all up to speed on it. So I'm like, speak to your agent. But the agents are free. Like, as a student, like for example, an American student, you should not be paying an agent to represent you to get a place in England. Like that's just doesn't happen. And in some universities, I know at Essex, they won't take you as an agent if you're charging students.
Gotcha.
So
because you guys are paying them on your end.
Yeah, the agents will get a cut of your tuition fee. That's how it works. And again, every university is different. Could be a couple of percent, could be as high as 10%. Again, I don't get involved in it. I don't need to be involved in it. So yeah, using an agent is beneficial because you've got their experience, and some of them will submit the application form on the student's behalf. And again, we're talking all postgrad here. So they will help you with your personal statement and getting your references and other documentation. And then they'll submit it when it's all ready. And that's the other thing with postgrad is you could submit now, which I would always highly recommend submitting earlier rather than later, because certain times of year admissions are swamped and there's a backlog of thousands and thousands, and you don't want to be sat there. We have a database with the admissions team, which I put people on, and so they get bumped up the queue. But when you've got 5,000 of them, you're like, that's a big old queue. You're
still deep down in the queue.
Yeah. And then with undergrads, again, we use the UCAS system, as does every university in the UK. But some of the European students that apply to Essex, they do use an agent. Okay. So I don't honestly know how that works.
Do you get kids through Erasmus? Not that Erasmus is going to be sort of a thing anymore. Maybe.
Yeah, we're no longer part of Erasmus.
It's a bit confusing, but there's supposed to still be a mechanism for that, right? If I heard correctly.
It's now called like the what is it, the Global Student Exchange Program or something,
Something, yeah.
which has half the funding.
Yeah, basically, for those who don't know, this is exchange between European countries. That's what Erasmus is now, continuing on the continent. But anyway, do you get kids through that program?
So we've had 2 people on Erasmus join us at Christmas.
Okay.
And they weren't on any scholarship. I didn't actually know. Sorry, I knew one of them was turning up. The other one I didn't know. And they were okay. They're all right, and they're here for a very different reason.
Yep.
And I say this to all the recruits. I'm okay with it. I just need to know what your focus is. If you're here to use volleyball to get your education, that's great. If you're using your education to get volleyball, that's great. But there's a very different relationship, the best want of a word, depending on what you want. So you just be honest, and then life is a lot easier. I'm not going to be chasing you if you're here just to get education and volleyball or something on the side.
Of course, there's also the third option.
Yeah. And,
neither education nor volleyball. I'm just here to party.
Some of them are. And
there's a quite telling variation on Erasmus that is used to describe what some of those students do during their time. We don't need to share that.
Yeah. But we also have had 2 students who are at Essex as part of the study abroad program. 2 American students. The first one I didn't know was turning up, just turned up, came to the second team training, which was happening beforehand. And then the coach that session was like, she wants to talk to you, tell you about herself, blah, blah, blah. Found out who she was, and that was from Bloomsburg University, which was a fairly new program at the time. She wasn't a starter for us, like far from, but she was a really good training player and a really good person. And she got an instant social network by hanging out with the girls. Like day one, everyone wants to be your friend, and she had a great time. And then we also had one of her fellow university students who applied to Essex for his study abroad, had heard from her that there's a volleyball program and they were quite good. So we were in touch a few months before, and he's like, hey, can I try out? Can I do this? So I thought, look, send me your video beforehand. Like, let's make sure this conversation is worthwhile. And actually turned out to be a really nice kid, and he was part of the squad that won the Bucks Championship that year. And he had a blast, and he still sends me emails all the time. He's just about to graduate from Bloomsburg. And he's talking about coming and doing his master's with us.
There you go.
So it does happen, these study abroads.
Yep.
And again, I can only speak about Essex, but I think it's 56 universities in America we're partnered with, so that study abroad program can happen. And they've all cleared it with their compliance people, and it's absolutely okay that they can come over, train and play with us for that semester, and then go back, and it doesn't affect that.
Exactly. Yeah, I did some research into that sort of stuff before. Okay, so we're getting close on time. So how about one piece of advice that you would offer coaches who are having to do most of their recruiting virtually, remotely, whatever? Something a lesson that you've learned in these years since you've had to do it all the time.
There's a lot of lessons. First of all, it sounds quite harsh. Don't take everything at face value, because people will BS you, or even just fluff it up a little bit. The second thing will be have multiple calls and fact check. So take some notes on that first or second phone call of the things they say, bring it up in conversation later, and just see if it's the same or similar answer.
Right.
Because again, it's just another red flag. What else? I know it's 2 and you only asked for 1, but
that's it. If you got another one, throw it out there. That's all right.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the other ones that would be most important. yeah, just references. Just make sure you follow them up. And if people don't reply to a reference, that's a concern.
Yeah.
Like if I've ever emailed someone for a reference and they've not got back to me and I follow up with a second email, I normally get a pretty quick response. I'm so sorry. It was the middle of the season. I completely forgot.
Right.
Yes, they're great. Blah, 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 blah. Not a problem. When it's radio silence.
Then there might be a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. The just to throw one kind of final bit in there, what you were describing before in terms of your questions are what have become known as behavioral interview type questions. And there's a chapter in Beth Lanier's new book that actually talks about the recruiting process. And in this chapter, it talks about the hiring process for assistant coaches and other staff. And she describes very much a similar sort of thing in terms of using behavioral type questions. She doesn't frame it that way. That's not what she calls it, but it's open-ended questions to get to know the individual, to get them to talk through scenarios and get an idea how they think and react to things. So use this sort of stuff. It's not a direct information exchange here. You're trying to go deeper, especially if you can't see them in person and get some of the vibes that you would normally get watching them interact on the court.
There was a podcast I listened to called Work Life by Adam Grant, who's a workplace psychologist. And he had some really good thoughts on recruitment. It's nothing to do with sport at all. But I mean, I enjoyed those podcasts. And yeah, there's a couple of nuggets in every one. So it's worth spending a little bit of time with that.